Hey, Cub fans. Thanks for joining us here in Cubs 24/7, where Randy talks Cubs. I want you to join me in welcoming Greg Huss, friend of the show. And let me give you Greg's information. He's a prospect guru. And now that spring training is over, we've had a chance to see a ton of prospects. I thought it'd be a good idea to bring Greg on and sort of go through some of the top prospects from his perspective that we may be looking to see in Wrigley in the short term, near term, or not too far off term, because there was a lot of prospects. You can find Greg on YouTube at northsidebound.com. His ex, you can find him there at Out of the Vines. His podcast is Cubs on Deck Pod. And Greg is just a wealth of information on prospects, and I look at his stuff nonstop. So, Greg, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. And just I'm going to turn you loose, and then we'll ask you some questions as we go. But we're going to define a prospect for Greg tonight as anybody who's not on the roster who we saw. So Bush to me is not a prospect. Javier, no. Jordan Wicks is not. Luke is on the roster, so he's not a prospect. And even Wesneski, Greg, I don't think in my mind Wesneski's a prospect anymore. So let's just do it. I asked him to come up with sort of his top 10, his favorites, and to just kick him off. The question I want to get him started on is, was PCA a disappointment to you this spring?
Um, no, I wouldn't call him a disappointment. I think that I was hoping he'd come out of the gate stronger in spring training after the work that he put in over the offseason. But I think it's one of those scenarios where he was going to end up in Iowa to start off the season regardless. And so I think putting too much stock into what we saw from him in spring training is I'm not too worried about it. Obviously, I would have liked to see him be better.
All right.
But I think that I'm not concerned. I'm not disappointed. It's just kind of, I would have liked
Right.
more, you know?
Right. We were all hoping for it. It didn't happen, and it is what it is. He's 22 years old, so we can all calm down. But we had high hopes, right? And it
And
was
we still
something
can. We still
we
can
still
have high
can.
hopes for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me turn it over to you. How do you want to give us like who are your favorites that you think we might see here in the short term? And I'm talking sometime this year.
Yeah, so I think that I think it'd be good to run through. We had kind of talked about the top 10 guys
Mm-hmm.
that we might see in the near distant future as far as prospects go. We can go into the weeds, and if you want to go into the weeds, you can check out my show over on Cubs on Deck in terms of some of these prospects, I guess projects too, prospects at the super low levels,
Yeah.
prospects that still have to do quite a bit to get ready for Chicago. We're not
Right.
going to do that here today,
Okay.
but we can run through 10 guys that we can maybe
Let's do it.
project to see in Chicago either this year
Okay.
early in the year,
Mm-hmm.
this year towards like a September call up, or early in next year. When you're talking that window of time, whether
Right.
it's
That's a
a
lot.
September call up or starting off the year in April or May next year, like
Mm-hmm.
that gets super tricky, right? Where you might see, I mean, we're going to get
Yeah.
into Matt Shaw. Maybe we'll see Matt Shaw at the end of the year this year. Maybe he's early
Mm-hmm.
next year. Like that's kind of the same thing in my eyes, how we envisioned it going into the year. So
Okay.
we'll cover the top 10 guys that I kind of can envision being in Chicago and making some sort of an impact between now, opening day 2024, and let's just say the first month or so of the season next year in 2025. So I
Let's
think
do that.
that PCA is probably the place to start, right? So we've seen
Right.
him up in Chicago. And I know that we know a whole lot about Pete Armstrong. I think that right now what we're looking at with him is we can watch him continue to grow. The Cubs can take their time in developing him down at
Mm-hmm.
AAA. Obviously, he shot up through the system so quickly from
Mm-hmm.
the time that he was acquired for Javier Baez to now. Like he was not, he didn't have to spend a whole lot of time at any level that he was at. So now that he's in AAA, like they can be much more deliberate in that development of him in Iowa. And then by the time he's ready, when he's really knocking on the door, not when there's a super need for him in Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
when he's really knocking on the door, the Cubs can say, you know what, like let's make some space for him. Let's move Belly over to first base. Let's
Mm-hmm.
do some shifting of where guys are playing. Pete Armstrong will come up to Chicago and he'll make an impact this year when he's ready, when the
Right.
time is, when he's shouting that he's ready to be a major leaguer.
Right. What about Cade Horton? Are we going to see Cade in the on the Wrigley Field mound between now and let's say June?
Yeah, I think so. I've kind of I think that right around Memorial Day, give or take a few, like several weeks here and there, right? I
Mm-hmm.
don't want Memorial Day to come and go, and
Mm-hmm.
fans that are listening to this to say, Greg said that Kate Horton will be
Yeah.
up here on Memorial
Wait,
Day.
I'm
What?
writing it down. Craig said
Yeah,
Memorial Day,
yeah.
Cade Horton. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think that a lot of people. I think Memorial Day is a really good example of like fans might start getting really antsy and say like, "What's wrong with Cade if he's not
Yeah.
up?" And either what's wrong with Cade or what's wrong with the Cubs if he's not up on Memorial Day. I think that the Memorial Day should be used as kind of a guide to say, you know what, that's right around when we should see him debut. We
Mm-hmm.
know there's. I think I've talked about it plenty. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot to take into account with Cade in terms of his pitch limit. We're not. I would be absolutely blown away if we see more than 130 innings this year from Cade Horton in the
Okay.
minors and the majors combined. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see a whole lot of increase in innings by really more than 40 innings year over
Mm-hmm.
year. So last year he was around the 80 to 90 range.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we see 130 out of him, that's a successful season. So I think that it'll be interesting to see where he's assigned. If you guys are listening to this now, it might be the minor league rosters might already be assigned as of now. They're
Mm-hmm.
kind of tricky on when those actually get announced. So
Yeah.
pay attention to where Cade Horton's assigned. If it's in extended spring training, which is
Mm-hmm.
perfectly fine. If it's in Double A, perfectly fine. If it's
Yeah.
in Triple A, also fine. Like wherever he's assigned, it's a very like there's a very strict idea as to what they have for his development timeline this year. So like
Right.
if it's in extended spring training, it's not like, oh, he's behind. It's just because the Cubs want to limit those innings early on so that he's maybe there for the playoff run in Chicago.
Wow. Well, let's do Ben Brown since we're talking about the young arms. To me, would you agree that those are the top two prospect arms, Ben and Cade?
Yeah, I think that if we're ruling out if we're ruling out Jordan Wicks,
We are,
because
yes.
he's still if we're ruling him out of the scenario, then yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think Ben Brown's been number two pitching prospect in the
Okay.
organization, and really like he just this spring he performed
Yeah.
super well to the
Yeah.
point where like I'm even more excited now than I was
Really.
towards the end of last year, obviously. So yeah, I think that he is a guy that will start in the Iowa rotation. He just shouts as a guy that will make an impact in Chicago in the bullpen this year. Maybe it's in the
Mm,
rotation, but I think that
mm,
there's a really good chance that we see him working in the bullpen, like we saw with Justin Steele a few years ago. It's like, hey,
yeah.
let's get your promotion up. Let's get you working out of the pen and succeeding. And then
Mm-hmm.
when we're ready to convert you back to the rotation, we're good to go. So yeah, I think midseason for Ben Brown in the rotate or in the
Okay.
bullpen in Chicago is something you should really keep an eye on.
You know, what's interesting about the Ben Brown and Kate Horton, maybe what we're talking about is dependent on couple variables. Number one, how effective is Javier? How effective is Assad? And I got to tell you, is Kyle Hendricks going to be able to hold down a rotation spot this year? So there's a lot of that, and that's not just talking about injuries and health. I have questions about the rotation right now. It could go either way because like you said, we really should be talking about Jordan Wicks as a prospect, right? But
Yeah, I mean, I
but we're
think
not.
that there's a lot of really what is weird this year compared to most years is there's a lot of prospect pitching depth, which that are like ready for Chicago, right? Prospects or like young guys, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's Wicks, it's Assad, it's Ben Brown, it's Hayden Wesneski.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of dudes that are ready to help the major league team, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times in years past, I'd say the last 6 years or so, maybe more than that, really maybe more than that, 8 years, 10 years. The Cubs have relied on veteran players down in AAA Iowa to kind of fill that need of major league depth, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the guys that have been around the block, the guys that are signed to minor league deals,
Mm-hmm.
that have played in the major leagues a decent amount that are
Mm-hmm.
just there as depth. And I think that this year is really the first year in a long time. I just talked about it with Iowa Cubs broadcaster Alex Cohen on my show. That this is really the first year that you're seeing a rotation in Iowa made up entirely of homegrown people outside of probably Thomas Pannone is a guy that we'll probably see in the
Mm-hmm.
rotation in Iowa. Outside of him, it's all homegrown guys
That's
or prospects or homegrown guys.
that's so refreshing, as a lifelong Cub fan to hear. And this whole farm system to me, I don't recall having anything like this, to where we're just such an abundance of guys, and it's a situation where we've got so many of them. We know that they're not all going to be able to help, but they could be trade pieces, and all of that. So there's just a lot of flexibility and opportunity for a bunch of guys. Let's go ahead. I'll ask you this. I've got the name in my head. Who's the first prospect bat that shows up in Wrigley Field? Will be who?
I think that I think that's tricky, right? So
Yeah,
I think that in terms of the first bat, if we're considering guys that just are not on the major league roster right now, if we're
that's
looking at,
correct.
I think that Alexander Canario is probably that guy since he'll be down
Okay,
in AAA Iowa, right? I think that he was this close to
he
making the major league
was.
roster. He was that close. So
Did
I think
wait? Do you think he lost it on that the last game when he went? He struck out 3 times. Was he that close? And then they made the decision because it was the next day when it was announced.
yeah, no, I think that I don't think so.
No.
I think that the strategy there is probably that they want to make sure that they're getting him consistent at bats in Iowa, which I love.
Yeah.
I love the idea of that.
Absolutely.
I think that he could have gotten a lot of at bats in Chicago, but
Mm-hmm.
like if they want to go the route of Mastroboni, Madrigal, I think that's fine considering those are like the 25th and 26th men
Yeah.
on the roster, you know.
Right.
If they're looking for if they thought that Alexander Canario was going to be that like fourth outfielder, if he was going to
Mm-hmm.
be like it was going to be the starting three out there, and then he's DHing and playing every day, one of those three is not in the
Right.
outfield, they probably would have had him start the year in Chicago. So
Yeah.
really, Canario is just a single injury away, and
Right.
even for like a small injury away from being back up in Chicago. So I'll go that route because I think
Okay.
that's probably the one call away type guy that's here.
I would have to agree with you because I think that they wanted Canario to
Mm-hmm.
do it. They gave him he led the team in at bats, if I'm not mistaken. And I did too. I kept waiting for him to kind of take that next step, right? I'm like, okay, and it was like watching uh, a plate getting ready to fall off a shelf. And
Yeah.
you thought, okay, it's going to fall off. Today's the day it's going to fall off. And it just never did. So you send him down, he'll take that next step, and then he comes back and he's probably ready to go. But boy, they sure gave him a hard look. They
Yeah,
really
and
gave
I'm
him.
glad I'm glad they gave him as much time in Major League camp as they did. I think
Yeah.
that's really important. This is Alexander Canario's last option year, I
Okay.
believe, unless
Yeah.
they give him an additional one. I
Well,
don't mark my words on that because I know that they were because of the weird COVID year, they
yeah.
were handing out extra option years to some guys, and Canario might have been that guy.
Okay.
Regardless, he either has one or no option years after this.
Okay.
So it's getting to the point where like they need to make sure that like they have exactly what they want in Alexander Canario moving
Mm-hmm.
forward. It's kind of like the Nelson Velasquez situation from a year
Right.
ago, where it's like we need
Right.
to know what you are. If you're not like a full time starter on this team, totally fine. But we need to see
Mm-hmm.
if we can use you as a fourth outfielder. Do we use you as
Yeah.
trade bait? Like how do we use you? So like I think this is a big year for Canario to kind of
Mm-hmm.
really carve out a role.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of Nelson Vasquez in a little while, but when you mentioned him, like, yeah, they're very similar.
Yeah.
Right. And I had the same expectations of Nelson that I do Canario as well.
Yeah.
Um, let's go Owen Casey. All right, got off to this ridiculous start. Just, unfair. I fell into the hype and I started expecting to hit a home run, every at bat, right? And then of course he cooled off and had a little, right? But then he has that big 3-run homer the other day, and then he struck out on a curveball and lefty, made him look like a seventh grader, right? So, right, and I'm like, yeah, yeah, give Owen some time. He's 21 years old, but my God, what potential, right?
Yeah.
How much time is he going to need?
So I think the big thing this year with Owen Casey is there's two things that he'll be taking care of in Iowa, right? One is consistency, which you kind of alluded to just now. Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's finding that consistency, which he will always be somewhat streaky at the plate because of because of his profile, because of the big light tower power, and strikeouts are going to come with that. Like that's going to be
Mm-hmm.
a streaky player, and you can put up with it if he's putting up terrific numbers
Mm-hmm.
overall over the course of the season. Totally fine. The other thing to watch with Owen Casey is just how he handles lefties and kind of crafty veteran guys at the AAA level. I've got
Right.
my mind like locked in on that. There's going to be some crafty lefties that know how to carve them up on the edges of the zone.
Mm-hmm.
Guys that I know that like in AA you get better prospects in terms of pitchers than you do in
Mm-hmm.
AAA. But like the guys in AAA know how to pitch and they
Right.
will know how to attack Owen Casey's weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something to keep an eye on for sure. Now, when we see him in Chicago, I think part of that is dependent on if he just tears it up. I think if he
Right.
tears it up in Iowa, I think we could see him mid to late this season, right? I think like
Mm-hmm.
July, August. I would not put expectations on that at all. My
Mm-hmm.
expectation is that we see Owen Casey early in 2025. I think that
Mm-hmm.
should be the expectation. And even still, like you mentioned, like that'd be 22-year-old Owen Casey,
Mm-hmm.
they like debuting
Right.
in, let's say April of next year, right?
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. That would be terrific, and that
Mm-hmm.
gives them a full year. And up to this point, the Cubs have been very deliberate with their. I know he's still young, but he spent the entire year last year in AAA. Before
Mm-hmm.
that, he was spent almost the entire year in South Bend, or sorry, in
Mm-hmm.
Double A last year. Before
Mm-hmm.
that was in High A. Before that was in Lowest. Like they've been very like one level approach, for the most part with Owen Casey. And so I think that like if he spends the entire year in Iowa this year, totally and completely fine. If he
Mm-hmm.
if he spends the entire year in Iowa and kills it, and then we don't see him until 25, I'm fine with
Mm-hmm.
that. If he spends the entire year in Iowa and he like goes through a lot of growing pains, also still fine. He's still super
Yeah.
young, still a
Yeah.
lot to get excited about. I think that yeah, my takeaway on that is expectations for early next year. Hopeful for let's say August. Let's say August
Mm-hmm.
of this year.
What do you think he's going to play defensively? Because I know he's an outfielder, not known. He's like the opposite of PCA, right? He shows up with his bat, and PCA shows up with his gloves. If you could combine them, you'd have a really good player.
Yeah.
But he's improved. Owen has, and again, he's 21 years old. But he's taking some reps at first base. They're probably moving him around. Where do you see him playing most of the time at Iowa this year?
So we saw Owen Casey get there. There were some pictures taken by our guy Rich Biesterfeld down in
Mm-hmm.
Arizona. That Owen Casey was getting some work at first base early on in spring training. I'm really curious. I would never get a straight answer from anyone with the Cubs, but like I'm curious on if they would be doing that if the Cubs had someone entrenched at first base
Right.
at the major league level, right?
Right.
My guess would be no. My guess would be
No.
no because we've seen improvement from Owen Casey in the outfield, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
Like he's been getting better. He's
Yeah.
still super young. He's been getting more athletic every single year, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. And he's a guy that he grew up in Canada, right? So
Yeah.
he was taking fly balls
Right.
inside warehouses,
Yeah.
indoor facilities, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that we've seen him get better and better. And in most cases, you'd let that ride. You let that ride
Yeah.
and you say, how good can he be in right field? Because he does have a cannon of an arm.
Right.
I think that when he gets called up to Chicago, the highest likelihood is that he slots in at DH.
Yeah.
Considering the how the outfield is set up with
Mm-hmm.
Seiya in right, Ian Happ in left, and then Bellinger, and then potentially PCA in center field. I
Mm-hmm.
think that like DH makes the most sense for Owen Casey. If I'm placing a bet on where Owen Casey ends up in Chicago this year
Mm-hmm.
and next year,
Mm-hmm.
DH would be my pick. Um, learning first base is not easy, man. Like
No.
if he's just now kicking that off in terms of learning first base, like he's not gonna be in games in Iowa the first few
Yeah.
months of the year playing first base. So like if I'm putting it in order, I'd go DH, corner outfield, and then
Mm-hmm.
first base way down. I think the first base later on in his career potentially, but not now.
Yeah, I can actually see him DHing for a couple of years before he starts getting reps and like just he's my everyday DH.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I could see that happening. Let's go, Matt Shaw. Matt played today, and I like Matt. Um, I, you know, he's obviously a hitter. My God, he's got bat speed, and right, he's going to be able to hit. And to me, I think he's not. His glove is behind his bat, so he can hit. I think he's probably ready to hit now. But do you think he's glove wise? How long before you feel comfortable with him every day in an infield spot?
I think that's an interesting question because I think that a lot of times people associate. I don't think you are at all, but I think a lot of times people hear that or ask that question or hear that question, and the hope is that like when is he ready in terms of like he's better than average
Mm-hmm.
at third base or
Yeah.
better than average wherever.
Right.
And I don't think that has to be the question. I think that you can view this as like he may be below average at third base, and that's still okay. Like he doesn't
Mm-hmm.
even need to be an average third baseman yet.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, yeah, you want him better than average at third base.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like when he gets called up, he doesn't need to be even
Right.
an average third baseman, especially when you have an infield of Dansby Swanson at
Right.
shortstop, Nico
Right.
Horner at second, and then if you want to move Cody Bellinger, who's super slick over there at first
Yeah.
base, you got a good infield. You're doing all right, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he'll be okay long term defensively. Whether that's
Yeah.
third base, whether something happens, they put him at second or wherever. Not shortstop, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
or if they ultimately end up moving him to a corner outfielder or center field or something like that. I
Mm.
don't know where he slots in defensively, but I do know that like I don't think it's going to be a super limiting factor for when we see him debut in Chicago. I think that if he's debuting in Chicago, it's because he's tearing the cover off the ball at the plate,
Mm-hmm.
and he's ready to hit.
Yeah.
So I don't view him as being called up and being a DH in the way that I view Owen Casey.
No.
However, I do view him in a very similar timeline to Owen Casey. I think that
Okay.
so I'd almost say like more hopeful for a September call up and then expecting next year. I think we can put an expectation of like, oh, maybe we see him early 2025.
Right.
Anything before September with Matt Shaw, it's like, oh my gosh, this guy is amazing.
Well, I really like him. I like his quick bat, and I like
Yeah,
his.
I do too.
I like his the way he plays the game. Plays hard. Plays aggressive. Right.
Yes,
And he's a little gamer, and his confidence levels just off the charts.
he's a pros
I
pro.
he's a pros pro. So, yeah, to me, Owen Casey and Matt Shaw at the point where they're ready to play, they're gonna be fun to watch every day. Where are we, and where do we stand on Kevin Alcantara?
Yeah, so Kevin Alcantara is not on say if I'm going top 10 guys that might debut this season and early next season, I probably
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't put Kevin Alcantara on
Mm-mm.
that. I think that we probably see him later next season unless we see a huge breakout from him this year.
Yeah.
Now, the thing with Kevin Alcantara is he's already in the 40-man roster.
Right.
So, once you get up to the double A level and you're on the 40-man roster, all bets are off,
Mm.
right? You don't need to go to AAA Iowa. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
already on the 40-man roster. You can be
Right.
called up at any point. And so like my expectation is not to see him until late in 2025
Okay.
with the caveat that like if he goes on this absolute bender between let's say May and August of this year, then maybe we do see a call up from Kevin Alcantara in
Mm.
September just because he's already on the 40-man roster.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he has that to his advantage. But yeah, Kevin Alcantara, I'm expecting a big breakout from Kevin Alcantara this year. We've seen, I think that Kevin Alcantara and Owen Casey often get compared to each other quite a bit,
Mm-hmm.
and I think part of that is because their age, their position,
Yeah.
their skill, their power, their skill set to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
We've already seen a breakout from Owen Casey. That happened last year when he was
Right.
minor league player of the year. We have
Mm-hmm.
not seen a breakout to that degree with Kevin Alcantara, and he's
Mm-hmm.
still ranked kind of hand in hand with Owen Casey on a lot of prospect lists. So like imagine how we view Kevin Alcantara after a breakout and what we kind of have as expectations for him at that point. So big expectations for a potential breakout season from Kevin Alcantara this year.
I certainly would if I didn't pay attention to his production and what the numbers are, and I just like watched him work out.
Mm-hmm.
But if you send him to a combine and
Yeah.
ran him through all the skill sets, you're like, my God, this guy's phenomenal. And you see it, like you said, he just hasn't broken out, but
Yeah.
it's coming. Um, and James Triantos,
Yep.
I like James, 21 years old, and I think he's sort of that second tier, behind Shaw and Casey and that group. But he's got a quick bat too, right?
Yeah. I
Like
think that James Triantos is cut from the same cloth
as
as Matt
Shaw,
Shaw.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think we got two of them.
Yeah, and I think that the skill set is a tick down in a lot of different categories than
Okay.
Shaw, but like I think that the hit tool is just as much there as it is with Matt Shaw. So James Tarantos will start the season in Double A Tennessee, I'm sure, at barely 21 years old,
Yeah.
right? He just
Yeah.
turned 21
Just
not too
turned.
long ago.
Mm,
And so with with him starting the year at Double A Tennessee, that's kind of crazy in itself that we're going to
yeah.
see him there. Yeah, we could see James Triantos early next season as well. I think that I have him on a little bit like a lot of things. I have him on a little bit delayed schedule of Matt Shaw. I think that a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
have viewed James Triantos as a potential trade deadline piece this upcoming
Mm-hmm.
year, like this year. So I'm really like that's something to watch this year, big time with
Yeah.
James Triantos is how does he perform in the first half of the season, setting
Mm-hmm.
himself up to be the main piece back in a big time trade deadline deal.
Has Matt Mervis, I mean, is he going to get a chance to get called up if need be, or are they going to just move him? Are they going to DFA him? How do you see it?
Yeah, I think that Matt Mervis is how I mentioned James Triantos might be
Mm-hmm.
playing for a trade deadline piece in the first half of the season. I think we
That's what
might
he
be
is.
seeing that with Matt Mervis to a certain
Yeah.
degree.
Yeah.
I don't want to rule out a Chicago Chicago playing time for Matt Mervis.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like, because I still believe in him as a hitter. I think that he's still really strong. He's proven he's too good for AAA pitching.
Right.
What he'll work on during his time in AAA this year is hitting lefties
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that he can cut down on the swing and miss quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think if he can do those things, then he can prove he's an everyday player for maybe a team that's a tier below the Cubs. And then at
Mm-hmm.
that point, he can try to break out at the major league level. My concern with him playing in Chicago is just that every move the Cubs have made have gone against their belief in Matt Mervis, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's the trade of Michael Bush. It's
Yeah.
the return of Cody Bellinger. It's the signing of Garrett Cooper. It's the
Mm-hmm.
keeping Patrick Wisdom on the roster when you have Garrett Cooper. It's like everything has gone against them. And like when I'm doing my rankings, right? I have Matt Mervis this offseason. I ranked Matt Mervis as my 13th best prospect in the organization.
Okay.
I may be down on that a little bit more now than I was, although that it's a kind of a weird range in the system. But I have to rank Matt Mervis based on the Cubs' apparent belief in him. And so
Right.
maybe I believe in him more than the Cubs do, but I have to trust in the decisions that the Cubs are making that show
Yeah.
how they feel about Matt Mervis.
Yeah.
And so, I think that he can still hit at the major league level. I think that's absolutely an option. It just might not be with the Chicago Cubs.
If the Cubs were Matt Mervis's girlfriend and we were Matt Mervis's friend, we would be saying, dude, she's just not that into you.
Yeah.
I mean, let's do one more. And this one to me, maybe most of the folks listening don't really know much about Moises Ballesteros, but I'm so intrigued with this guy. Where is Moises going to be playing? Is he starting Tennessee?
Yeah, so Moises will start in Double A Tennessee. And it'll be really interesting to watch him this year
Yeah.
defensively.
Yeah.
I've talked about quite a bit how Moises Ballesteros and how you rank him as a prospect and how you view him as a prospect is entirely dependent on position. We know the dude. I'd argue that Moises Ballesteros has the most complete package at the plate of any
Yeah.
prospect the Cubs have.
Yes.
He has insane feel to hit. He can
Mhm.
hit. The power has shown up, and I think the power is going to get even better in terms of like that pull side, like raw power.
Yeah.
And he can work an at bat with the best of them, whether it's drawing a walk, limiting strikeouts. He has that complete package at the
Mhm.
plate. Now, how you rank him? Let's put him in perspective of like a top 100 list, right? If Moises Ballesteros can remain behind the plate defensively, even if he's not like a plus defensive catcher,
Right.
but if he can remain behind the plate defensively at the major league level,
Mhm.
then Moises Ballesteros is a top 25 prospect in all of baseball. Like he's an elite level prospect.
Mhm.
If Moises Ballesteros has to move to first base, then
Yeah.
I think that makes him more of a fringe top 100 guy, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
you have to hit. You have to
Yeah.
hit at first base. If he's a DH, then he's not even a top 100 prospect, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
And so that gets super interesting on where we watch him throughout this season. The tricky thing was about I think he has the hands and the skill to play first base,
Mhm.
but he might be 5'9" standing on tiptoes. And so
Yeah.
you don't see a whole lot of first basemen at that height.
No.
And so that's just something to keep an eye on. I think that with Moises Ballesteros, we should not expect to see him in Chicago this year in 2024. I think that it's just so tricky with do the Cubs want to try to continue to develop him as a catcher? Because if so, if they want to keep working him as a catcher, then we might not see him in 2025, even if he is killing
Yeah.
the ball.
Right.
If they're reserved to the fact that he might be a DH or first base or whatever, then I think we could see him as long as they think the bat is good enough and like we
Mhm.
know the bat is good. So it's all about like how the actions the Cubs take and how much we see him behind the plate. He's going to be splitting time with Pablo Aliendo behind the plate at Double A
Okay.
Tennessee. And we know Pablo Aliendo is a prospect worth keeping an eye on as well.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the same category as Moises Ballesteros, obviously, but like how those guys split the duties behind the plate is worth keeping an eye on.
Well, Moises is 20 years old, right? So
Yeah.
you look
super
at this you watch him in the box, 20 years old. It's an amazing look.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pay it. He's probably the one minor leaguer that I really want to watch this year to see just kind of what's going to happen with him. So that's a good look. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm juiced. I don't know. Thursday night, I don't know if I'll just be giddy.
Yeah. I
I'm so
throw out two
ready.
more names
Yeah,
real quick
yeah.
here. So I got two more names that I won't go into too much detail, but it's something to keep for people to keep their eye on
Okay.
when they're in AAA this year. That's Luis Vasquez and BJ Murray Jr. Both
Right.
guys that I could see coming up this year in Chicago. They're lower
Mhm.
ranked prospects. Luis Vasquez, we know the deal with him, that
Right.
he plays incredible, incredible, incredible defense.
Right.
Multiple Cubs broadcasters in the minor leagues have said that Luis Vasquez is the best defender they've ever seen during their time
Mm,
covering the minor leagues.
no kidding.
And so I think that it very well could be, as if Dansby stays healthy, Nico stays healthy, Mastroboni stays healthy, if all those guys stay healthy, and Madrigal or whatever,
Hmm.
we may never see Luis Vasquez this year. He may
Hmm.
operate as pure depth at the major league level, or at the AAA level for the
Hmm.
major leagues, and that's totally and completely fine. I think that's super valuable just in a skill at that. But if we see Nico go down, or if we see Dansby go down, or
Right.
both of them, if both of
Right.
them go down, we will definitely see Luis Vasquez in Chicago
Okay.
this year. And then BJ Murray Jr., I think that I can see a scenario where he is called up and kind of fills that hole at third base.
Mm.
If Christopher Morel doesn't hold it down at third base, if Matt Shaw is not quite ready, the
Hmm.
perfect fit is BJ Murray, who's going to be ready there. He's going to be playing third
Right.
base at Iowa. He has proven to be a good hitter every single year. He's
Hmm.
proven to get better defensively every single year. Not a tip top prospect, obviously, not the Matt Shaw
Right.
level, but he can make an impact and not look out of place when he gets
Yeah.
called up to Chicago this year.
Switch hitter too.
A switch hitter,
So
draws a lot of walks.
yeah.
The power is
No.
developing. I like BJ Murray quite a bit. But
And both
yeah,
Vasquez and Murray are 24. So they're
yeah.
still
And
young,
Vasquez
still
is already
getting
on the
better.
40-man roster too.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, Greg, listen, I really appreciate you coming on with us. I know this time of year we're transitioning now, and I'm gonna fade away on the prospects for the most part. I'm a big league guy. You stick to it though,
Yeah,
because we'll have questions, and we'll see how things play out. Right? We'll see how they do, and next time we feel like there's an issue, I'll touch base and I'll have you back on, and we'll talk Cubs.
that
How's
sounds good. I appreciate it. Yeah, and if you guys out there are wanting your prospect fix, go check us out.
that?
Like Randy said, check us out on the North Side Bound YouTube page,
Yep.
Cubs on Deck podcast. We're coming out with episodes. We'll have episodes drop every week on Tuesday,
Okay.
covering what happened in the minor leagues the previous week. So check us out. And minor league baseball, Major League Baseball starts on Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
Minor league baseball starts on Friday for the AAA level, and then
Okay.
the lower levels the week after. So it's that time for me too.
Well, we'll be following. I follow him on X, guys. I really like his X account. So that is again out of the vines. And check Greg out. He's got some really cool stuff that we don't really think that much about, and very interesting, different perspective. So, Greg, thanks for joining us here on Cubs 24/7. We really appreciate it, guys. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see y'all very soon. Go Cubs, go!